Hi everyone, my name is Kees Keizer. I'm an assistant professor and consultant in the field of influence and persuasion. There are so many wonderful books in the field of influence. Books that help you understand, books that make you laugh in recognition, books that make you disapprove in fury, also very important. Books that maybe invite you to make the world a better place. Now, I thought, therefore, it would be a nice idea just to do some book reviews, share my thoughts about some of the books in this field, and hopefully they get you excited enough to read them and on the basis of that form your own opinion. So the book I like to discuss is How to Win Friends and Influence People from 1936. It's a book by Dale Carnegie. And seriously, it must be the corniest title ever, right? But don't let it fool you. It is a very interesting book. It's a book about how kindness, sincere kindness, and interest in the other can be tools of influence. And it talks about techniques that you can use based on this. So who was Dale Carnegie? He was a writer and he was a developer of courses for salesmen and manager, that kind of people. And he, at a certain point, thought there was a lack of books that focus specifically on how to deal with people. Although that was a question he often received. How do you communicate to others in an effective and influencing way? So he took this topic and started researching it and came to the conclusion that there was indeed not a lot out there. So he looked at the books and the biographies of various leaders to come up with a series of principles and techniques that can make you more effective in communication and in influencing others. And that is the book. So what are these tips? I will name a couple. First up is, in order to influence people, you should take their perspective. So you should practice empathy, understanding the wishes and the needs and the perspective of other people. That is basically one of the cores of his technique. Empathy is also important because it helps you not to be so critical towards others. Often when we work together with other people, you tend to over-focus on the mistakes that they are making. And we have a tendency just to make these mistakes very salient in order to motivate them or maybe inspire them to do better. However, Dale says, don't do that. In general, people do not become motivated from you showing their mistakes. Rather, the opposite happens. First of all, they tend to explain and become more convinced of the mistakes that they are making, that these mistakes are actually the good thing. And the other thing is that relationships tend to sour if you become overly critical. If you do the opposite, if you focus on the strengths of somebody else's work, if you showcase and make salient the progress that they're making and praise them for that, then first of all, it has a strengthening effect on the relationship, but it also motivates, makes people more certain and more confident, and these are all tools to make their work better. So praise basically all the stuff that they are doing well. Now, to make this clear, this should not be flattery, hollow flattery, as Dale explains. It should be sincere praise. Now, other elements he's mentioning that we know are, for example, linked to liking, are smiling a lot, mentioning other people's name during the conversation. All ways to strengthen the bond, basically, and induce liking. Another point that he's making is talk less, ask more. So he says that if people are engaging in a conversation, they will rate that conversation as more pleasant when they do all the talking and you're the one merely asking. So rather than you telling a lot. So you should focus on asking questions, because people will see the conversation as more pleasant, and the bond between you two is strengthened. Now, also related to that, he says, rather than you telling people how to behave and coming up with solutions for a certain problem, you should let people discover these solutions on their own. So this is kind of linked. No, it's not kind of. This is self-persuasion, right? Because when people come up with the solutions themselves, they are more confident in that, they're more acceptant of them, and they're more foolhardy in actually engaging in the behavior. So ask questions rather than telling them a lot. Now, when you have to discuss a certain topic, try to focus on topics that the other person finds interesting. And always try, these are his words, always try to make the other person feel important. This is something that they strive for, this self-worth, and this is something that you should strengthen. It will increase, again, the relationship between the two of you, but also it will give a person, for example, proudness in his work. You can even take this a step further by giving somebody, for example, a reputation, or presenting them as somebody who's noble, for example. Now, if you would give them a reputation, for example, say, well, I know you're somebody with a keen eye for detail. What will the effect be? That people will tend to and try to live up to that reputation, thereby kind of influence them. Now, when people make mistakes, always present them with a way out. So just don't corner them that the only thing they can do is basically admit that they did something wrong, or that they're a bad person or something like that. Always give them a way out. Connected to that is that if you want to highlight a mistake, that you should always start with highlighting your own mistakes. And by pointing them out. If I were in your situation, I would have done so much worse. And I'm always a person who doesn't have a good eye for details. Okay, some criticism regarding the book. I think the main point, that an objection that you could have, is that it sounds hugely manipulative, right? Being nice in order to influence others. And I see where that is coming from, absolutely. However, I think that the author makes a good point, that what you should do is be absolutely sincere in the compliments and the praise that you give, and that the whole practice is focused at strengthening bonds between humans and making the other feel appreciated and feel good about themselves. Now, what can be wrong with that? And a byproduct is then that you're also more influential. What I found interesting from an academic point of view is that it's interesting that we are very scared, become quite outraged when we have the feeling that somebody could be nice in order to gain something. It's almost like we prefer a more directive approach, which is somebody just being nasty towards us, but we have a clear picture of their intentions. Now, that is just interesting. But I agree with the author on this point, that strive for good relationship, let the other feel good, and these are important points. And just, it's almost like a book on good manners in that way. And in the end, it also makes you more influential. Now, what's the loss there? But I would be very interested just to hear how you think about this after you read the book. Now, then there is the question, of course, is the book dated? Because it's from 1936, and content-wise and the advices that it gives, I don't think it is. So it's applied to, for example, salesmen and bosses, and how you write a letter, a resume, and that kind of thing. That is, of course, not applicable anymore these days. So it could use an update in that, but it's not hindering. The general advice and the tips and the principles, that are behind it are still very valuable. What I found very dated was the stuff about between men and women. So women, it generally often talked about housewives and very traditional roles, and it was, that was cringy to read, really. Now, the positive. The book is a fascinating read. Really, it is. It is, of course, from 1936, but that really adds something. If you're a student in the field of influence and persuasion, it's almost like a game that link the techniques that he mentioned to later research. Because keep in mind, a lot of the research on these techniques are from a later phase and a later stage. So that makes it very interesting as we read. Now, if we dive into the techniques themselves and how valid and impactful they are, many of them really are. And some of them are really an eye-opener. You thought, oh, I didn't think about that from that perspective. For some of them, you already know of their influence, but then it is a very good, strong reminder that being kind and interested in others is not only very good manners, but also a way to strengthen the bond and be influential. And I think it's an important reminder. Now, hopefully this review, my thoughts, give you enough enthusiasm to actually read the book and, most important, form your own opinion. I've just one small tip. If your goal is to actually win friends, then maybe this is a good book, but do not read it in public. Not with such a title. Seriously, corniest title ever. You just gotta love it. You should read it only for the title, right? It's beautiful.